Hi, and welcome to our special guest interview for this week, which is the legend that is Carl Reeder. Good day, Carl.
Hey Rob, how are you?
Wonderful, Carl. Lovely to have you on the show with us. You're an old friend of the show. I've known you a long time. You have your finger in a lot of pies, but one of the most recent ones after the success of your book, Boss It, has been your alliance with Practice Ignition. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, sure. So I've known of Practice Ignition as a company for years. In fact, I got to know them in their very early days when they first came over to the UK. So I've been in and around the ecosystem and knew about them as a business. But in truth, Rob, if I can be very honest with you, in the early days, I didn't really know what they did.
Hmm.
You know, we
That
run
was
a
just you, Carl,
multi-million.
because everyone else knew. No, I'm joking.
So
They did struggle with that. You're absolutely right.
yeah, so we run a multi-million, multi-award-winning practice, and we looked at the product very superficially and didn't see how it would fit in.
Hmm.
So that was going back, I don't know, 6, maybe even 8 years. Along the way, we were quite fast growing, so we specialised in the franchising space, and one of our challenges as a business was the integration of our business development, so sales and marketing, through to our operations, through ultimately to pound, shillings, and pence in the bank.
Yeah.
And we knew it was a pain point. We didn't quite know where it was. So we started professionalizing this by using a competitor's product. I don't know if I should say that, but we were using another proposal package. And the reason that we used it was quite simply because that was the buzz of the industry. That was what people were saying we should use. But it didn't really fix the issues that we had. You see, with where our business was, we didn't need templated proposals because, quite frankly, we could afford a designer to do it for us.
Right.
We had our own proposals and so on. We knew that something needed fixing, but we didn't really know what. And there was a light bulb moment, Rob. The light bulb moment for me was that I sat in a demo, and I don't normally sit through demos. I sat in a demo, and there was a really simple bit of functionality that was so obvious to me with my deep-rooted accounting trainings. Now, I've not been on the tools for years, probably about 15 years since I've been on the tools, but I knew that the fact that we could integrate the payment processing with the acceptance of the client saying yes, that integration solved us a problem that was probably a person and a half of admin time, so on and so forth. It was the real light bulb moment. So
Hmm.
that was really what kicked it off. And I've been working with the brand since as what's labelled as head of accounting, so helping them understand how accounting firms work, and on the flip side, helping them amplify their message. And it's been amazing to see the product where it's got to so far and where it's going.
We'll talk a little bit more about the story, but you are an influencer for many brands, not just in the accounting fintech world, but outside that to serve the small business community. So, what kind of questions do you ask yourself in aligning your brand with another company's brand?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Rob. So, I've worked with American Express, Vodafone Business, Mercedes-Benz, some real heavy hitting brands.
Yeah.
And it's been an honor to be asked by them to help represent them. But there's a few questions that I ask myself. The first one is, am I a customer of theirs, or would I be a customer of theirs?
Right. That's
It's
important
not
to you, isn't it?
always it's not always possible to be a customer in certain circumstances. However, would I take money from my own pocket and pay for it, like I do with Practice Ignition, like I do with American Express? Yeah, they charge me an extortionate amount for my platinum card.
Hmm.
However, it lets me go through security, it lets me sit in the lounges and so on. So the value is worth it for me. Like Mercedes Benz, I was driving a Mercedes, etc. So I look for that authenticity first of all. There has to be that congruence, that genuine belief in the product.
Yeah.
Secondly, the brand has to be aligned with my own personal viewpoints, my own personal opinions on the way that things should be done. And that's a big thing. most brands have a superficial layer of what they put out there,
Yeah.
but the reality is they have to behave in that way too. And then thirdly, they've got to be people that I get on with.
Mm,
And if you can tick all of those boxes, then it tends to work both ways.
yeah.
If not, then I'm pretty sure that there'd be a problem down the line.
Yeah. And we have an international show here. We have thousands of listeners all over the world. Just give us a flavour of the Practice Ignition brand, Carl, and what it does and where it fits into the fintech ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of, if I touch on the brand itself rather than the product for this
Right.
answer, and correct me if I've gone off on the wrong tangent, the Practice Ignition brand always jumped out to me as a very vibrant brand, fairly cutting edge, very community focused, and very human to human focused. You know, one of the big, I guess, risks for the accounting world in general that I see is that there's a reliance on online communities, and online communities are great to a point. However, we're in a people business, and as automation creeps in more and more, we're going to have to get used to and get comfortable with being back in the room with people.
Right.
So, you know, that certainly jumped out to me from the brand. But I guess most importantly, the brand of PI to me was for people. Yeah, the first people that I met, I think the first person that I met from PI was a guy called Brendan, who's still with the business, but he was in the UK, as I say, probably 6 or so years ago. I then met Trent, I met Guy, and I've obviously met far more of the team as I've gone on. And the people really, I guess, they were the spotlight of the brand. They were the essence of the brand. And I think that's continued right through till today.
So what exactly does Practice Ignition do for those people that haven't come across it?
Sure. So I'm going to first of all say what my initial impression was, but it prepares proposals and engagement letters. Okay.
Yeah.
That was what I originally saw that it did. That was what I understood that it did. And as I say, as a business of a certain size, the question we had was, why wouldn't we do it ourselves? What does Practice Ignition actually do? It creates a seamless customer experience from when you first meet your client right the way through to when they pay you. So it integrates the process of pitching, proposals, payment collection, which is the vital bit, and a single point of truth. And it puts all of those into a dashboard going forward where you can view where your business is going. So the net benefit for us at D&T was actually from 2 different sides. The first one was that we totally eliminated our debtors and lockup through using the software. Just for those who maybe aren't involved in the financial management of accounting firms, they're both very big numbers, and they're numbers that are sat in our clients' bank accounts rather than ours.
Yeah.
So we took the brave step of writing off our work in progress balance. We have converted to a business that actually doesn't run with debtors. In fact, our clients pay us upfront on a non-refundable basis. So that transformed our financial position as a business. But secondly, what does Practice Ignition do? It gives us what I call true practice management. Because practice management in the accounting world is often seen to be task planning, workflow planning, capacity planning if you're lucky, but it's all focused around timesheets and retrospective actions. To me, practice management is, where will our business be in 12 months' time? What will the revenue look like? What cash will be coming in? That allows me to make business decisions for my business rather than for me to know what tax return needs filing. That's the important stuff. So it gave us a true level of practice management, which we hadn't seen in any other product. So those were the 2 key benefits for us: eliminating lockup, true practice management. And it just so happens that it also does proposals, engagement letters, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And how does it affect the client experience? You've got a really good relationship with your clients. How does it change that, make it better?
It's massive. So one of the, I guess, the disconnects that we had in our business was that whilst we could do it ourselves through getting a designer and Microsoft Word and all of these ways of doing it, one of the disconnects we had was that we were putting ourselves out there as being a modern online firm. I mean, look, Rob, we started doing online accounting back in 2002.
You were a pioneer, Carl, back in the day, weren't you?
Honestly, you hear of people today saying that they were futurists because they just bought into online accounting. You hear people 10 years who did it 10 years ago saying we were the OGs. We were doing it in 2002. And the reason we were doing it in 2002 was because floppy disks were getting broken in the post. So hopefully that paints a picture of what the landscape was like when we first got into online accounting. But our onboarding experience never quite caught up with it. So we would issue nice presentations and PDF documents, but it would be disjointed because then there'd be emails that were manually typed out and going out. Then there'll be reliance on administrators behind the scenes. And what the software's enabled us to do is, whilst we could do all the stuff ourselves manually, it's wrapped it up into an online shopping cart. So a really good way of thinking about this perhaps is a Shopify for services, in that a business can pull it in, so an accounting firm can pull it into their business, just like they would Shopify, and they can sell their stuff seamlessly without having to get involved. And the beauty of the payment collection, which was the key thing for me, and I know I keep coming back to it, again, it's the accountant deep in my heart somewhere, is that they have to pay for it before they get it. It's like Sainsbury's. We wouldn't go into Sainsbury's and expect to walk out with a shopping cart on the promise, but we'll click the link to go to a direct debit provider and pay for it at some point.
Yeah.
Instead, that's all connected up.
Yeah. Let's ask about the space that Practice Ignition works in. We did a show recently where Martin and I talked about and we named names, Carl. We talked about Go Proposal and the Sage acquisition and what that meant for the space. And they would claim to play in the Practice Ignition space, but you've got a really good whole of market perspective. You've done your due diligence. You don't step into line with a brand lightly. So what are the key differences in Practice Ignition and the other players in the space?
Yeah, sure. So look, to address that question head on, I genuinely believe Go Proposal and Practice Ignition are two different products.
All right.
And whilst there is a bit of a crossover in terms of functionality, we've used both. I mentioned that we'd used a competitor. We used Go Proposal before. Go Proposal is good if you want a systemized menu pricing approach.
Right.
We saw it more as a pricing tool, which we didn't actually need because we're firmly of a belief that the best pricing tool is between our two ears. And we don't price based on transaction numbers and so on. So the model didn't work for us. But it was a great pricing tool and PDF creator. Practice Ignition is a great PDF creator, but then goes on to a payment processor and a practice manager. So
it's a whole onboarding tool, isn't it, as well?
Yeah, so there's a bit of crossover in the middle, but I really see that one bit of software is here, one bit of software is there, and it was that bit that helped us run our firm and really have the security of payments coming in, but also the management information that we needed.
Got it. Does Practice Ignition stand on its own in what it does, Carl, or does it compete with, say, practice management providers in its offering?
So in my opinion, we've not seen anything like it.
Yeah.
We've not seen anything that integrates the payment and the engagement process in the way that Practice Ignition does. And look, to put some flavour onto this, because I know that there were some questions when I've mentioned this before, and people saying that's not an issue for me. But in the nicest possible way, they were taking on 1 or 2 clients per month. When you're running a proper accounting firm and taking on 10 to 20 clients, possibly even in a day, we were having to employ someone full time to be constantly on the phone, chasing by email, just to make sure that link from PDF proposal to payment was taking place. That was a really expensive task. So that combination I've not seen elsewhere. Now that's not to say that it doesn't exist, but I've not seen it.
Yeah. So what should accountants be looking for when they want a tool that will do what you're talking about?
Sure. So let me answer that quite straight. You need to be looking at flexibility.
I could ask a much better question there, couldn't I? Really, that was. Let's edit that.
You could. Let me just answer it anyway, as it stands. I mean, you can ask me another question afterwards if you like, Rob. The first thing is you need to look for flexibility. You need the tool to be able to work in the way that you want to work. Now, it can't necessarily be a bespoke tool for you. No software house is going to make a bespoke tool for you without you paying bespoke fees. But for example, if you use free option pricing, you want a tool that can do free option pricing. If you want menu pricing, you want a tool that can do menu pricing and so on. So you need to make sure that the flexibility in the tool is not stuck to a single way of doing things. Much like, I guess, the comparison between, for example, some of the ways that Apple do things versus some of the ways that Google does things.
Right.
You need to look at the differences in approach and what works for you. Secondly, you need to make sure that there's the right level of support, the right team members behind it, that the implementation process is robust and that you're going to go through it. And ultimately, that you're going to be paying for a bit of software that you actually use rather than a license that sits on the shelf.
You bring up a really good point there, because one of the key things about technology is adoption and the way it integrates with the other things you're using in the firm. How does Practitioner stack up there?
So really well. It's got loads of integrations and so on. And Rob, I have to be honest, in terms of my hands-on experience of integrating, I haven't got any.
No.
My firm pays me quite literally not to be rolling my sleeves up and doing stuff. And the reason my firm does that is because I employ far better people to do that stuff. However, it's got integrations with the like of Xero and QuickBooks Online and so on and so forth. It's got the integrations to ping across, job taskings and invoices and all of this stuff. So the integrations are there, and they're continuing to grow. But yeah, don't ask me any questions on what buttons to click to do it.
I get that, but a key part of software integration is the adoption and the education that a software vendor gives the accounting firm to make sure that that software gets used.
Absolutely. But I think implementation isn't just about integrations. For me, a successful implementation is about a strong onboarding program. And I know the guys at PI have got a very strong onboarding program. We've gone through it ourselves as customers, so we've seen it firsthand. It's about any assistance that can be offered with change management, but ultimately it's about vendor and firm being aligned in the fact that the use of the software is the true win-win at the end of it.
Yeah.
Often there's, we've had ourselves too many occasions, I definitely won't name names here, where stuff has been sold to us as a firm, and it's about the sale of licenses or the sale of product, not the usage of licenses or product. And actually, it's the usage that's key, because the usage is what creates the magic that the product was designed to deliver.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can see how it starts client relationships on the right foot and takes a lot of the hassle out of the onboarding and the conversation, the money conversations, the sign-ins, the automated payments. It just seems so much simpler, doesn't it?
Yeah, it saved us. It saved us manpower, and when we combine the costs of the people just going through the direct debit spreadsheet every week, picking up the phone, you haven't clicked on your link yet to set up your direct debit. It's madness. Yeah. When we add to that the cost of having a credit controller in the firm, when we add to that the risk of refunds and so on, that was, it sounds brutal, but that was the real cost to us of not doing it. Yes, there's some bits that are nice to have, but that was the real cost.
Yeah. A couple more questions, Carl. This has been great. In your role as head of accountancy, what exactly does that entail for Practitioner?
Sure. So it's a two-way relationship. So it involves me being a mouth on a stick, which is what I'm fairly good at, I guess. Getting out there, being seen, and so on and so forth. But also, and I perhaps underestimated this at the start, to be honest. I spoke to a guy called Paul Bolpit, who had this role at Xero before agreeing to go on board. I did my due diligence, and he said it was fascinating because you get an insight into the business and you really feel that you give back. So the input that I've been able to give about the reality of how a firm works. So as simple as how a firm would evaluate software, how they would buy it, the people that are involved and so on. That kind of insight is really powerful. And I've realized since being involved, but I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about high growth startups and the culture and the way that they run. And on the flip side, I would like to hope that PI have learned a lot as well.
Yeah.
The difference between the theory behind how accounting firms work and the brutal reality of how accounting firms work.
Yeah. And we've got a special link at info.practiceignition.com/AIP for the Accounting Influencers podcast if people want to know more. But Carl, you said your mouth on a stick. You are always open to conversations with accounting firms. Are you open to people reaching out to you if they want to talk?
Absolutely. So by far the best way to make that initial contact is by social media.
Yeah.
That is the easiest place to find me, because I spend 24 hours a day, if not 25, sat on social media. So that's the best place to find me. Reach out, connect, start the conversation, because I love getting to know people and love having conversations.
Yeah. And what might be the warning signs or the red lights that an accounting practice might be having for them to warrant a conversation with you and talk about Practignition?
Yeah, sure. So I think that I'm going to answer that in a couple of different ways. I'm going to answer it from a conceptual perspective and then go down to some specifics. But conceptually, I see it as the very top layer of practice management. And if you're serious about your firm, i.e. you want to have more than a handful of clients, i.e. you want to at some point take on staff, etc., it's worth getting it in from day one.
Yeah.
Because change management and retrofitting stuff is always more difficult than starting as you mean to go on. So I would say from that perspective, it would be anybody. However, what are the specific red flags where I would say you really need this stuff?
Yeah.
First one is if you haven't increased your fees over the last year.
Okay.
I know firsthand that we always say that we're going to increase our fees by 5% a year and so on. But the reality, when you've got a 200 quid tax return, the hassle of writing to the client to get a agreement to a 5% price increase, it's not worth the 10 quid.
Yeah.
It's too much of a pain. But when you add that up over 2,653 clients and then the cumulative impact year after year after year and the increasing impact, it's a huge sum of money that we've missed out on. So the first red flag, if you haven't increased your fees in the last year. Second red flag, if you haven't had a conversation with your clients about pricing in the last year. So if you haven't reevaluated in terms of scope creep or service creep. So I use scope creep slightly different from most. Service creep is what most refer to as scope creep, i.e. You're doing extra bank recs or extra bookkeeping or so on. Scope creep, in my opinion, is when you do a favor for husband and wife and then it starts to expand out and you actually look after more people than you should be. So that's the second one, if you haven't had that conversation about the services and so on. The third one, if you haven't updated your engagement letters recently, right, because these things do change and it's a pain in the backside. And I shouldn't mention this as chair of the ACCA Practitioner Panel, but they've already slapped me on the wrist for it. We used to only do it when we had to, but actually it's been best practice to proactively design how our engagement letters should look, make sure that they're fit for purpose for our business rather than just ticking an institute box. So those would be the things that I would look at. But realistically, if you're a small practice and you've got ambitions, I would bite the bullet and go for it sooner rather than later, because once you've got the system in place, it then grows with you.
Yeah, that's very good. And final question, Carl. You are a pioneer, you're an early adopter, you're a tech person. What do you feel is coming up in this space over the next few years? If we're having this conversation, say in 5 years, what kind of thing will be happening?
Yeah, sure. So I'm honored that you've called me a tech pioneer. I just know when I see a good thing and I jump on it.
Well, not everyone does that though, Carl, do they? They wait and see.
Yeah, so we've been fairly lucky. We've backed the right horses at the right time. That's what we've seen. And I think, what do I see from tech in 5 years? Really good question, Rob.
Well, particularly, you can see what's coming up for Practignition over the next few years and their R&D and what they're working on.
I can, and I've also had an insight into other brands as well. I think that the big fear is that compliance is going to be automated. Yeah, that's the big fear in the industry. And I don't believe that that's the case, because whilst it would appear to be a commodity at certain levels, I think customer behavior, they still like to have a face to speak to. And we found that ourselves. I set up a business called Taxco with a couple of colleagues, and we found that it was very difficult to go direct to market, and others have tried it, but I don't believe that's going to be the real angle. I think that what we're going to see, however, is we're going to see an increase in analytical software that can help streamline, systemize, and regularize the checks and reviews that accountants do. I think we're going to see artificial intelligence being used to act almost like an always-on advisor. But I do genuinely believe that these tools are going to be offered for the good of the accountant-client relationship, rather than to replace the accountant. I genuinely believe that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that if an artificial intelligence tool flagged up that a client should potentially consider this and consider that and restructure in this way, I don't believe an end business user wants to translate those bullet points into actionable steps. They want their hands held. But what I think will happen is that the accountant's role in the process will move from providing information to being a translator.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, Carl Reeder, brilliant interview today. Thanks so much for your candor, for your passion, and most of all for your insights. That's been great.
Thank you, Bob.
You've been watching or listening to the Accounting Influencers podcast, featuring hosts Rob Brown and Martin Bissett, with key interviews, what's working in the accounting profession, and news from the accounting and fintech world that helps you do your jobs better. We go out to 144 countries, over 20,000 unique listeners, with 100,000 downloads, and it is accredited for continued professional education and development. Thank you for tuning in.